What is up? I am seeing if my Wi-Fi can handle streaming to Twitch and YouTube at the same time. I have a very low Wi-Fi speed at this new place that I just moved to, but it worked earlier. So I am going to make a snare, and then I'm going to rewatch the stream and see how horrible it was. So the type of snare that I'm going to make is, I call it a clack snare. And it's kind of a, I don't know, I guess it's kind of like a Jack U type snare, but I like making them in my own way. So let's get into Ableton and I'll show you a little bit about how I go about making some of these. So there's a few different elements involved. I like to have kind of a punchy transient in there somewhere, and then several little like clicks or littler sounds, almost like clappy sounds, and you can make them with a clap. So I guess I'll show you like the fundamental way to do it, like the easiest way to do it, with just classic samples. So I'll just get a 909 clap. Shout out Cymatics. And then I'll get a 808 snare. There we go. It's like an 808 snare. And then maybe like a 707 rim shot. Classic sounds. Yeah, so this is the basic idea. I like to have the transients staggered so you get a nice kind of a clack. Turn it down a little bit. So we can space these a little bit closer together. And then kind of, I'm going to just balance them out a bit. And then I like to play with the order, so it gives a different vibe to have the lower transient snare last. And when I'm making these, I like to just kind of loop up a section so I don't have to keep hitting my space bar, and I'll just kind of work on this a little bit. Sometimes it's nice to have like a bit of noise on the tail of it that just comes in kind of like this too. So maybe I'd like low pass this snare drum a little bit because those other elements have a good amount of highs. So this will add like a little more contact or contrast to the overall sound. So I especially like it when it's going like high to low to mid or mid to low to high. So we could maybe reverse these two. And maybe that snare sounds weird when the transient is low passed. So maybe I'll do like an automation of the frequency so that it kind of starts out with highs and then it filters them out. So now I'll make some from scratch with some more interesting and unique sounds. So I might make a transient first, just with a synth. You can pretty much use any synth that makes a sine wave. I'm just going to use Kick 2 because it has a really nice GUI. So I'm going to just mute all the sample clicks and turn the EQ and the distortion and the limiter off. And dial in a little transient. So I want it pretty short, like this. And turn it down a bit. Get the pitch right. So that's pretty good right there. I'm just doing a like a double 2 levels. So like a higher kind of punchy part and then it kind of bottoms out at a lower pitch. So I'll just hit render there, generate. And now we have like a transient. So that's pretty nice. So now I could get some stuff to use for the clack part. So I think a lot of times I like to use Foley for this kind of thing. So I'll go in and get my Foley samples out here. And there's a lot of different types of Foley you can use for this. I have them roughly sorted here, so let's just kind of find some things. Maybe a coin clink could be cool. Yeah, something like this might be cool. So when I'm doing this, I like to put a group and then just put a saturator. This has been one of my favorite saturators lately, the Melda saturator. You can hold command when you're trimming stuff, and if the grid's on, it'll let you snap off the grid. Same thing with placing it. You hold command and it'll let you kind of get off the grid. So that could be a cool transient to the snare. And then maybe I'll just kind of make a sidechain kind of effect. So I kind of want something crunchy. So maybe let's go back to our Foley and get some sort of crunch. There's this sample pack I got off Splice called Camera and Film Bible. And it has some kind of cool crunchy stuff. Yeah, like the beginning of that could be really nice. I don't know about the tonal part, but this. So maybe I could sidechain this again a little bit like that. It could be cool to have a little bit of noise to layer on top of that snare. So let's see if there's some noise. Yeah, some stuff like this. So this is another sample pack. It's called Coin Clinks. And there's some pretty good sounds in here for making snares. So that's sounding kind of nice. What else do we have in the Foley? Yeah, some stuff like this can be pretty cool, especially to add like stereo image, because this one especially has just a lot of stereo image in it. I'm just gonna kind of EQ it a bit. Maybe high pass it and then low pass the sides and high pass the sides, even though I already high passed it. Let's see. So that kind of gives it some nice extra crunch. Maybe a little bit of some sort of stepping on sticks type sound. Let me see. Yeah, stuff like this can be pretty cool too, like metallic stuff. And sometimes it's nice to have some upper harmonics on that on the tail of that snare. So something you can do is maybe a little wave folding. So one thing that's really cool about instrument racks is if you put an instrument rack and you have an effect and it's fully wet, you can make a dry chain and then automate the gain of the wet chain. So I'm just going to listen to the wet chain first. So that wave folding on a sine wave sourced sound can sound really nice and plastic. But instead of having that just happen the whole time or blending it in like this, which does sound kind of nice, if I automate that gain of that chain to come in just like this maybe, then we could almost get like another transient out of it, but it's like a built-in transient, I guess. I don't know, let's try it. Maybe we push it even harder. And then I could actually also automate the volume of the tail of the dry chain snare to kind of mirror this. So I could just copy the automation and paste it onto the chain, and then I can let's see, what is the trick here? It's some sort of command, it's some sort of combo. There we go. It's shift command. So if I hold shift command, and I know my theme is a little messed up here, you can't really see. Is it shift command? Yeah. So if I do shift command, it'll let me kind of invert that. So that gives me another kind of little clack transient in there. Let's see if there's any other cool stuff in this metal sample. That's pretty nice, but it has some crazy mid and crazy side information. So I'm gonna do some mid side EQ. So we're kind of leaning into the metal here. Let's go back into our Foley and see if we can't balance this out with maybe some water or something. Oh yeah, this kind of stuff, this crunchy Foley. I don't know what this is, but there's a lot of ways to make this. If you get into recording your own Foley too, that's really a fun way to go. So I think you get my point. Just layering a ton of stuff on top of a transient. And then if you want to start going further with it, you can experiment with starting to push that clipper. So if I resample this now, we have kind of a pushed square wave texture clack snare. So I can just do resampling and then record. And then I have this heavy snare. So now it has that harmonic content from being clipped. And then the textures are kind of nicely integrated because they're getting pushed out of the way a little bit. So the benefit of making these instead of just using ones from sample packs is if you're doing it for a specific song, you can actually do these, you can time your texture out to hit along with whatever groove you're working with, and you can have the little hits happen on like 32nd or 64th notes or whatever. But you can see it's kind of a nice ramp. And so a lot of times how I sequence these is either I'll have them come in here and then it gives it that lazy snare feel, or I'll nudge it early so that that snare transient is right on the downbeat, but the transient is coming in early. And I find these kind of snares just really cut through the mix. So one thing I do like to do with these clipped snares is I do like to come in here and just modulate the gain slightly on this clipped transient of the snare, or I guess the body of the snare a bit, just to give it a little kind of compression effect. And sometimes it's nice to come in here and do a little bit of gain automation here just to give it that extra tight quality. Sometimes it's even nice to just turn off the grid and just do some really like detailed stuff like that. Just to give each one of those transients a little bit more space to hit. So we could flatten that now, just Command J. And so now you have kind of a better shape for a drum. It's going to feel more punchy and less floppy. But like I said, it still has that nice square sounding, square wave type harmonic content, because when you clip something, it turns it into kind of like a detailed, funky square wave. So some things that are cool to do with this now that you have it kind of bounced out is it can be cool to just unwarp it. I find these often sound really cool pitched down. Like that sounds like a bass. So they can make pretty cool effects, like you pitch it down and then you reverse it. Like that is a really cool effect. Put that before, like as a, like a little transition sound before something, like put that before an 808 bass or something. So yeah, and if you don't want to change the timing of it and you don't want to mess with granular warp modes, another way to kind of dial in the sound, if you want, is to use like a frequency shifter, and you just put the dry wet all the way wet, and then you play with the fine knob. So I'm actually liking how that's sounding more. So that's cool. Maybe I'll take a version of that. Or actually, I'll just freeze that and flatten it. I'll just go with it. And then I'm just going to render it out. Take the audio from 12, make sure it's 96 kilohertz and 32-bit. Sephiros. Clabonk. Snare. Boom. So I really like those type of snares. And you can do a lot of things with this technique. So try this with basses. Try taking a bass sound instead of this snare transient. You could use like a tom or an 808 or whatever, some sort of bass sound that's mostly sine wavy, and then just put it through a clipper with a bunch of different weird textures from different materials. And that can be a really nice way to make bass sounds. This is just a great way to make sounds in general. Just layering up weird textures. And I used Foley in this instance, but if you're going for more electronic sound, try, instead of using Foley, try using little clicks and pops and glitch sounds from like circuit bent toys, or analog gear, like the sound of like unplugging a jack socket, like unplugging a jack cable, or like you can even take like a mic and just rub like stubble on the mic, or rub like a brush on the mic. That's a really great way. There's like so many different weird ways to make texture, and you can never really get enough texture. But I think the added benefit of using Foley is that Foley tends to be very, if it was recorded in stereo, it tends to have a lot of nice stereo information. But if you want to make this sound more electronic now, you could do something like put like a spectral, some sort of spectral plugin, like a Spectral Resonator, and just kind of blending that in. Get some more highs. This granular mode's really crazy on the Spectral Resonator. Like, that's pretty insane. I'm gonna take a version of that. Yeah, that's a pretty crazy sound. You know, just keeping it really subtle, but it added more stereo image. It added more digital sound. And yeah, so if you want it to sound kind of more digital and electronic, that's a cool way to get some more texture and stuff out of it. Let's see, what else could you put on it? There's so many things you could put on it. You know, you can get some pretty unexpectedly cool results by just distorting the shit out of these. Like, that sounds great. Yeah, heavy. Like, that almost sounds like a chord at the end. And then you can use like OTT to bring out more of it. So sometimes OTT is kind of nice on these kind of snares. Let me go into multiband, get my OTT preset, and then duplicate it like 4 times. The lows are a bit much here, so I'll just turn the lows down. Highs up. And another thing is cool, if you don't just EQ stuff. If you feel like this has too much lows in it, maybe the lows would sound good if I just group an EQ. And just similarly like how you would with a bass sound, you could do a frequency split. So you could like split it into lows and highs. And then I can automate the volume of the chains. That sounds crazy, just cutting away the actual transient. But let's bring it back in. And with this top one, let's EQ it even more. So now I think that low is just going on for too long. So with the low band, I can just automate the chain volume to cut off, like right here, completely. Or maybe just down some. And then similarly, I could automate the top to maybe go down quicker too. Or maybe I could even add more bounce into it by doing something like this. So you can get some pretty nice kind of punchy sounds that way. So I'll actually take a version of that. Just copy it and paste it down here. Unfreeze, and I'll just delete all that because I like this. But this is pretty wild. This has a lot of energy to it. So, you know, now we have this snare and we have this old snare. Maybe if we want to bring some punch back in it, we can just bring some punch back in it that way. Like we could put this and line it up with this. Yeah, and then we could maybe bring some of this down here. And maybe even this part of the snare sounds better. So maybe that would be cool. Maybe even the end crossfade. So crossfading is definitely your go-to friend for a lot of this kind of. And maybe the beginning of this sounded good. So that's kind of like a cool hybrid of amped snare and not amped snare. So you have like this. Has more highs, it's pushed, but it still has that nice clean transient and that transient and the little crunch here. I like that one. I'll export that one. Amped. So yeah, that's just a little bit of an intro on how I like to make my Clack snares. They're very fun. I think they sound great. They cut through the mix quite nicely. And yeah, start experimenting with layering up crunchy layers and stuff and have a blast making snare drums. It's not as hard as you think to make a smacking, crazy, unique snare drum that speaks to your soul. And, you know, don't feel like it's bad to use sample packs, but you will learn a lot from designing drums. And even if you love your sample packs, just make some drums every once in a while just to learn, because what it does is it trains your brain to be able to listen to very small sections of time, because you spend a lot of time honing in on what does the transient sound like, what does the body sound like, and what does the whole thing sound like all at once. So your brain's doing that like simultaneously on a super finite scale of, 30 milliseconds, 10 milliseconds, and you get to the point where you can literally hear 2 milliseconds. And you can hear the difference the sound has over those few milliseconds. Maybe not 2 milliseconds, but definitely 10 milliseconds. And that'll help with all kinds of other sound design. And yeah, you'll be surprised what kind of discoveries you get. And it'll help you create your sound, because I think drums are a huge part of your sound. And I think people who don't make their own drums, they have a hard time standing out. So take drums from your sample packs and put them together like this. Start layering them up together and crushing them together and then expanding them again. And I think it'll help you find your sound and your vibe. So yeah. Until next time, I'm Sephiros. Check me out on everything. I really hope this stream went okay. I'm going to check it now. My new Wi-Fi is not the greatest, but I'm really hoping I'm able to stream to YouTube and Twitch at the same time, because that's how I make my YouTube videos, because I am lazy and I don't have time to edit videos. So these are long format, and I hope some people get a lot out of these, even though it does take a little bit of patience. But anyways, Sephiros 5EPHR05. Check out my music on platforms. Check out my Patreon, same name everywhere, and send me a DM. I'll say hi back. So yeah, until next time, peace.